This is potentially an emotional talk for me because I have been doing these grad talks since 2016. From 2016 to 2018, I was the faculty director of the grad talks. And when I couldn't find somebody to give the talk, I would give it myself. And I ended up with a cache of something like 18 talks those first 3 years that I put on YouTube. And that became the basis of my YouTube channel and the basis of my podcast, Molecular Podcasting with Darren Lapomi, available where all podcasts are downloaded. And as a result of that work, I was invited to become the faculty director of the Idea Engineering Student Center. And then a couple, probably just like less than a year into that job, they decided to merge the role of faculty director of the Idea Center with associate dean for students, which I did. And then because I had the word dean in my LinkedIn profile, I started getting all kinds of poaching emails from departments and other schools. And I, on a lark, made some application materials and applied to them. And my wife told me there's no way in hell we're going to someplace that has no opportunities for her, and said, well, why don't you take those materials that you created and apply to someplace where it's logical to do so. And I did, and now I'm leaving UC San Diego. And it's very bittersweet and in many ways sad, but I feel that this talk is a bit of a bookend to the interaction that I've had with this group over the last 8 years in particular. So I kind of sold the farm in that intro here. But how I got here, I never thought I would be giving this talk. And I think that life is a series of accidents. And I originally was going to give this talk kind of as a generalized bit of advice. Would anyone mind getting the door out there? Thanks. As a generalized bit of advice for how to think about your transition from one career stage, thanks so much, to the next. And then I put some ideas into ChatGPT and I said, what are some things that I could talk about? And I got all these bullet points and they were almost all useless. And then I'm like, okay, I got to start from scratch. And that gave me the opportunity to say, you know what? Screw general advice. I'm going to tell you about this scenario that happened to me as a professional engineer, and then I will invite you to apply some of the things that I've learned going through this process that may be relevant to you in various career transitions that you in fact are inevitably going through. Whether you're a grad student or a postdoc, you're going to be transitioning to some new role in the reasonable future. So life is kind of a series of accidents, and I think that we have some idea that we are fulfilling some movie-like arc, and we just have to make the decisions that the character, namely us in a movie, would make based on their predilections and background and interests. But you can never really predict what's going to happen, right? Like, sometimes somebody comes down an escalator in Midtown Manhattan and all of a sudden there's a new president they never thought would be president. And you can never predict those things that happen. So for example, when I was starting out in my job here, one of the reasons that I got my job is because there was a faculty member who left to take another job at CU Boulder. And that opened the spot for me, but it also opened the service roles that individual was doing in the department. Namely, one of them was diversity coordinator and seat on this Idea Center faculty advisory board. The other was teaching Nano 202 intermolecular and surface forces, which I ended up teaching for 10 years in a row, and is actually probably my premier product on YouTube. If you're ever interested in the Derjaguin approximation and so forth, you can check that out. But that was largely accidental. And then being affiliated with the Idea Engineering Student Center as a faculty board member got me involved in faculty coordination for the grad talks, which led me to do the YouTube and the podcast and the associate dean for students and the faculty director, and then the new job opportunities. And I had no idea that things were gonna go that way. They originally thought, oh, let's pawn off these jobs that are hard to recruit people to do on the new person, and who knew it would lead to a separation over time. So that's really that would have been a difficult thing to predict, right? Like I never would have written that into a life arc or career arc kind of thing. So the first thing that I tell or that is told to me when I say that I'm moving from San Diego, California to Rochester, New York is, are you expletive deleted crazy? And I love the beach. I love being outside in the sun in December and January. And then this picture on the right, this is the great ice storm of 1991 in Rochester, where each tree developed a 3-inch thick radius sheet of ice that caused massive damage to physical infrastructure. And for a while, you could walk around or drive around the region and see the top 20% of every tree was just sheared off, if not completely fallen over. And I remember in fondness, I was 8 years old at the time that this happened. And we had no power and no heat in the house. And we cooked our eggs in a frying pan in the fireplace. And our power was restored, luckily, after 3 days. But most of the region's power was not restored for a week. And because of the multiple power outages. And anyway, why on earth would one subject oneself to this transition on purpose? And one of the repeating themes of this talk will be that happiness equals reality minus expectations. It's investing in the mostly undergraduate student experience. It is investing in all kinds of technology for education, labs. We're number 4, I think, in research expenditures. That's like more than Harvard, more than Stanford, more than Berkeley. And it's a lot more than those places. It's like $1.7 billion. Like the amount of opportunity here to work in so many different areas and with such intense depth is like beyond world class. It's universe class. Seriously, like I think we sometimes take for granted just what is here. But there is always an opportunity to, what it comes down to sometimes, or what at least came down to for me, was sort of asymptoting what I thought I could do here and looking for a change of scenery for a number of reasons that I will get to. But I just want to give you a little brief context on what I mean by university administration. So the university administration is kind of made up of 2 tracks. One is academic personnel. So professors, usually PhD researchers, who get a title that's somewhere above professor. And they're always professor and something. And that is like chair of the department, who usually controls or has the final say on teaching assignments, space allocation in the department. They have the final say on what was I going to say? On personnel, so hiring and separating faculty and staff. And so that's what the chair does. Then there's an associate dean position, which sounds like it's more powerful. It's definitely not. Associate dean often runs interference for the dean, and sometimes ideally has a collection or portfolio of projects to make their particular associate dean area more flourish. So as associate dean for students, I'm responsible for many like scholarship development, so getting scholarships, grad fellowships, postdoc fellowships, that kind of thing. Curricular review, making sure that our time to degree stays in a good position so that undergrad students aren't taking 6-7 years to graduate, trying to streamline curricula, stuff like that. And a bunch of other responsibilities. There's also associate dean for faculty. They're responsible for promotion and tenure and awards and endowed chairs. And sometimes there are some kind of ombuds type roles, that is like peer mediation type of things that happen actually in both of our positions. Associate dean for research, and they're responsible for bringing together large groups of faculty and looking at strategic initiatives. And that's kind of the idea. Usually there's somebody for development and advancement. So those are kind of two similar words that mean fundraising from corporate sponsors or from philanthropic donors. That's associate dean. Then dean is in charge of all of those things, kind of like the chair of the associate deans and the chair of the chair, the chair of the chairs. Sometimes in the UC system, you have this title called chancellor. Chancellor is called president at almost every university. So you have a vice president or associate vice president, or in the UC system it's chancellor. The reason that we use the word chancellor is because the president activity is done at that one office in Oakland where there's a president and then vice presidents and so on. Then you have on each UC campus the executive vice chancellor of academic affairs, and that at every other university is called a provost. The provost is in charge of academic issues, which means, well, what on earth could a university be doing that's not academic? Well, a lot. Health sciences, research infrastructure. Technically, student affairs does not fall under the provost because they're like, student housing, dining, that kind of thing. That's not specifically academic, but usually the provost, because the academic affairs unit or area of the purview or the reporting structure is usually kind of like the executive officer to the president or chancellor, depending on the university. And then you have the chancellor and the president who's in charge of all of that stuff. What else? How does a university make money? For example, the chancellor, the president is in charge of all incoming and outgoing stuff. Often they have a cadre of business professional staff like chief financial officer, chief business officer, chief IT officer, chief innovation or patent licensing person. And oftentimes those people come by way of the professional staff. And the professional staff are people who were not career academics, but might have an advanced degree in business or economics, or have the equivalent experience in the private sector, who move into university administration. So familiar people into the department level: student affairs, academic affairs, faculty affairs, facilities management, finance, etc. And those job titles are things like assistant, manager, director, executive director, all the way up to things like assistant dean, assistant vice chancellor, assistant chancellor, those kinds of things. And that doesn't mean assistant to the chancellor. It usually means that they're the chief of staff, that they are in charge of implementing the strategic vision of usually an academic personnel that rose to that level: dean, vice chancellor, chancellor. And then chair has that person too. They're called a management services officer or chief administrative officer at each department. And every department at UC San Diego has that kind of person in it. All right. And finally, there's an increased professionalization of formerly academic personnel. So sometimes people that achieve the roles of vice president, vice chancellor, and even chancellor and president sometimes come from not necessarily the scholarly community, but more from maybe they were in the scholarly community before, but then they pretty much gave up their research and they went on the administrative track. So there's definitely some crossover nowadays between the pro staff and into the academic personnel categories, which is kind of new. Okay. What is in my own career transition? What's the gravity? What's the pull to stay here, besides the weather and everything else awesome that I said about UC San Diego? So I feel, if I may say so, that the last 4 years in the dean's office in the engineering school, I've had some amount of impact. We've raised, I've been connected to the raising of like maybe $3 million in new scholarships, and including corporate partnerships. We developed a program called the Engineering Community Hour, which we now have to turn students away from. That's an undergrad thing. It happens the first Friday of every month. As Associate Dean for Students, I've had 30 or so really intractable PI student conflicts that have had some degree of resolution after passing through my desk. I feel pretty good about those. We've made some strides in math preparedness. So in the United States, calculus preparedness for engineering students is at an all-time low, and COVID made it a lot worse, to the point where something like 25% of incoming engineering undergraduates at big public R1s are not qualified to take calculus in their first quarter or first semester. And so we've been trying to provide free or minimally cost resources to decrease that number, because we find that math preparedness, I'm taking a garden path here, but it's important. Math preparedness is highly correlated to non-retention in STEM fields, where if you come in at a pre-calc level or even at an algebra level in some cases, those students are really susceptible to drop out of not only engineering, but drop out of college. And it's not, their fault, right? They were at a high school that just didn't have the resources in most cases, or whatever the reason is. Something we need to take care of. We made really good strides on an AI-enabled textbook and tutor to kind of augment the instructor and TA level of support. That works almost too good because no one comes to my office hours, and so still tweaking that. And then there's this issue of time to degree progress. I think we've, at least during my time, I'm not going to say that I had anything to do with this necessarily, because it's a big ship to move, right? But our time to degree aims are going in the right direction, that students are taking less time to degree, but in the reverse, something that I'm going to drop on my successor in the Associate Dean for Students position, is that grade inflation at the undergrad level, especially since COVID, is outrageous, to the point where at a big public R1, something like 60% of engineering students are graduating with a 3.5 or above. Perks. Making no value judgment there. I'm just going to say it. All right. What are the perks? You get it. At first I read this. Wait, this is on the perks page. Small stipend. I meant you get a small stipend, not the stipend is small. You get a small stipend, a few $1,000s, less than $10,000, more than $5,000 for the job. You also get 6 weeks of summer salary, and while most people in an associate dean role would probably get that anyway through their grants, they can use those 6 weeks of grant funding to support half a grad student or a postdoc for that money. You get a parking space, but as I mentioned, you still pay for it out of pocket, and you get a title and a new business card. And what is if that's the gravity, what is the repulsion? I felt personally that I'm kind of asymptoting professionally, at least in terms of administration. There's always more that can be done in teaching and research, but I do enjoy the administrative part of the job. I really do enjoy it. Asymptoting, so saturating what can be done. Once you develop a relationship with a company and you develop a pipeline program, you've already done it with that company. And you could just go back to them and say, I want more money. We want more students. Like, well, we don't have spots. We don't have the budget for that. Okay. You could keep knocking, but I don't know if that's going to get you what you want. Okay, I'll say it. Since the strike and since the 30 some odd student PI conflicts, the job is really emotionally draining. It's not smallest violin kind of thing, but it is. It's just true. And oftentimes it's not. And oftentimes it's because it exposes to you many of the ways in which students and postdocs are being treated unfairly, and how little, this is not common to UCSD or specific to UCSD, it is specific to a student affairs officer's job at any university. And the more you get, and oftentimes you have to be peer mediator between chairs of departments because, well, this student doesn't want to be in our department anymore. They want to work for a PI in this other department. Well, I don't want to pay for that student. They're not part of our graduate program. Well, I'm not going to pay. That was my whiny chair voice. And so that happens, and you have to mediate that, and you lose sleep over it because sometimes they blame you. Sometimes they blame the messenger. Like, look, I'm not the one that made a 5-year guarantee to the student, and now you're just hanging them out to dry. And so what if there's a UAW grievance? We can absorb it. And then what happens in an administrative role is that each year the same things come up, and it's boring. It's boring. How to get faculty and staff to volunteer time on Saturday for commencement. Master's commencement, the college's commencement, the PhD hooding ceremony, ring ceremony, and then everyone is mad at you. And so those kinds of things that are routinized, and I know I'm whining, but it's fun totally sometimes. And so that type of routinized work, just even no matter how long you do a job, there's always some bit of routine in there that can get old. And this is going to sound like I'm whining. I just admitted to that. But I think my upward trajectory in administration on campus was uncertain or delayed. I lost the last 2 elections for chair. Low compensation relative to workload. So less than 10, more than $5,000 for something I spend 60% of my time doing is not worth it. That is largely my fault, because if I got the job description and I said, what is the minimum level that a mid-level academic administration person needs to do to check all the boxes, it is much less than what I'm doing. In fact, even access to that parking spot by the pools would be good enough for the minimum amount that I'm actually required to do. But I'm not that kind of person. I'm gonna do stuff that I don't get paid for, just because I love my job and I love working with students. Nevertheless, I still need an outlet to absorb my personal energy. And I think many of you will someday be in a position where you get a job that sounds amazing, and then 4 years later, maybe it's still amazing, maybe you're still doing the same thing and you love doing it and there's opportunities for growth, but sometimes you're kind of bursting at the seams and you feel that you could shift and do something different. And then repulsion to depart. Someday, if you're at a conference with me and you want to get coffee or a drink, could be non-alcoholic, I'll tell you the rest. What is the personal pull? So I have a daughter who will be 5 next month. We are a bit isolated from campus, or from family, in kind of the lower left of the country, especially when I'm from the upper right of the country. I had a health scare in my extended family. It's actually not just a scare, because it actually happened, where my cousin, who did all the right things in life, had a good pension. He's quite a bit older than me. He has a daughter who's my first and a half cousin, because my first cousin's daughter. She had a very difficult pregnancy, and at the same time that she had to be inpatient for a month for a complication to her pregnancy, her husband had an accident and was paralyzed from the neck down right before their baby was born. And my cousin, who did everything right in his life, solidly solidly middle class, like by the skin of their teeth, the families could get together and do something to help the family. And the realization for me is that if something happened, I don't think financially we would have been able to absorb a similar shock to the system. Part of that has to do with the fact that housing expenses in some parts of the country are outrageous. And in general, people will tell you when they give you financial advice is that if you have over 90% of your net worth in a single asset, liquidate it immediately and diversify it, especially if you have an asset that just went out of control high. Now, what could that have been over the last 12 years? My house. And I feel very guilty about this because I didn't do anything but buy the house. And the San Diego real estate market, as you know, is out of control. Okay, so the word associate dean was on my LinkedIn profile, so I started getting poaching inquiries in the summer of this past year. I didn't believe that I was qualified for some of these leadership jobs, and in fact, all of them fell through. Well, they didn't fall through, they just stopped contacting me or told me they moved on to another candidate. But some of them were for dean, and I'm like, I can't do that job, but maybe based on my LinkedIn profile, an executive search firm thinks I can, and maybe I could do that. I'm thinking of the Leonardo DiCaprio Jack Nicholson conversation from the movie The Departed, where he's like, do you think that you could do what I do? Yeah, I think I could do what you do. And then I thought about all the deans that I've ever known. I'm like, I can do that. Hell yeah, I could do that. And so I put together this application package, and I had a Zoom interview for one of these leadership jobs. That one wasn't dean, but it was a prestigious department head job at a highly ranked institution. And I sent my wife a Zillow posting for a house in that region, which doesn't have anything in her field in that region. And she said, absolutely not. And so she said, I know that you have this desire to maybe do something else or have it make a change. And she said she's in principle down for that, but it has to be in a place where it's logical for both of us to be, which of course makes sense. So why don't we make that logic have something to do with family? Everyone thinks that their kid is like difficult. I really do believe that despite that, our kid is still difficult. And so it might be nice to have family around to absorb some of that. So we settled on applying to two places that both were department chair. One of them was in Texas. The other one was in Rochester. And the University of Rochester, that's where it was, has a special place in my heart. I actually went to I went when I was a junior in high school on a field trip to a chemistry lab at U of R that was doing organic electronics. And I learned for the first time that grad students get paid, albeit not very much. And I'm like, all the things I could do for $17,000 a year. And there were, they were distilling tetrahydrofuran in a flask. And there was some other stuff that was fluorescent. And I'm like, sold. That's what I want to do. U of R also, the inventor of the organic light emitting device and organic photovoltaic cell is also an emeritus professor in the U of R chemical engineering department. That's Ching W. Tong. He actually invented it a few years before his arrival at U of R up the street a few miles at Kodak Research Park. Rochester is known among other things for like imaging technologies. So Kodak, Xerox, Bausch and Lomb all started there. So the history of photography, history of xerography, history of biomedical optics, optical-based biodevices are, many of them were invented in Rochester, and the Institute for Optics and the Department of Chemical Engineering there had a strong role to play historically in those places. So what was the process? This is the beauty of applying to a private institution, is the rapidity of how fast decisions are made. I applied around December 20th. I got an invitation to do a Zoom interview on December 22nd. I did a Zoom interview on January 4th, in-person interview on January 11th. I actually completed negotiations on the plane on the way back. And then I had a paper offer on January 30th. An offer for my wife came through in February. That was made official in March. The lab renovations there are taking the next 12 months or so. Right now I'm adjunct there, and I'm still employed here. But then after July 1st, I'll be employed there and adjunct here. So I'm hoping it all blends out. Washes out. So what are the deltas? What are the changes for me personally? I got to divest from the San Diego real estate market, and that is definitely carrying a lot of load there, that word divest. Diversify our personal finances. There are climate considerations, that is to say, the physical climate, the weather climate. Goodbye year-round sun except May and June, which suck in San Diego because you're so close to summer and the marine layer doesn't evaporate. But anyway, I'll trade that every day of the week for sun in January and February. Swimming outdoors in the winter at Canyon View and at the beach. I love the beach. But then again, happiness is reality minus expectations. Hello, winter activities. And then global warming has actually changed the weather in the Great Lakes region probably forever. It's not Great Lakes, but New York City actually had 2 inches of accumulation this January for the first time in 2 years. Winter is on its way out in the Northeast. Still gonna plaster my house in solar cells and probably never reach the energy payback time for that investment. There's a joy of hot beverages on a cold day, and I'm only partially joking about this. And winter holidays just make more sense in the snow. I remember the first winter I was here, it was winter of 2012. I was swimming at Canyon View, and like Santa Claus is coming to town was on the radio. Like, this does not compute. And then proximity to family, that much improved. Okay, professionally, the deltas, I got a favorable salary and startup. UC San Diego would have matched it, probably. Similar proximity to work, live pretty close here to campus. New place is pretty close to work. There's a really good opportunity for my wife, who has given several of the grad talks the last couple of years. You may have seen Dina Uzri. She'll be now the director of new technology ventures at the U of R tech licensing office. So a startup, she'll be providing guidance and resources to university startups. This could go one way or another. In the department, there are like 30 to 45 undergrads per year and about 12 to 15 grad students per year. And UC San Diego Jacobs School, because I'm in charge of student affairs for all 6 departments, it's 10,000 students at any one time. So it's like a couple hundred versus 10,000. So maybe I'll be dealing with fewer issues outside of my control. Programmatically, because the department is chemical engineering, I might have a little bit more domain expertise as well. But there are some downsides. I think it's going to be more difficult to recruit in Rochester. There's the weather, number one, and rankings are bullshit, but UCSD, if you take the whole campus altogether, it's like number 32 or something for total U.S. News and World Report, public and private institutions, all in. U of R is 48. Engineering at UCSD is around the number 10 position. It's not that at Rochester. So some things are up, some things are down. Rochester has one of the best optics graduate programs in the world. And it has a medical school like UCSD, so this is kind of a wash. They're both in walking distance, and the clinics as well. There are also some issues of private school versus public school. Part of me wants to be the kind of person who is putting service into a public institution because I feel a strong personal opinion that education should be part of public goods. Public universities are increasingly becoming privatized as the share of state appropriations in the total pie chart gets reduced monotonically. At some places, it's really ridiculous. Like some public institutions are like 5% or less of their total revenues are state appropriations. University of California is funded at a much higher level than that, like a factor of 4 higher than that. But still, it decreases like almost every year. It's like in the news, right? You can fact check that, but over time it's down. Private institutions, however, move a lot faster in general. There is less bureaucracy. There's less fighting with the state board of regents and then the state assembly, state senate, and the governor's office. And you don't have as many competing influences. You don't answer to as many people at a private university. So I'm going to give it a shot and see how it goes. So here are some things that I would suggest when you are in the position to possibly transition in your own career, is assessing personal and professional fulfillment. Why are you looking for a new environment? Is it because of logic? Okay, you're a student or postdoc now and you're going on to be a professional. That makes sense. Sometimes you're in situations that are primarily push, where you have reduced satisfaction or whatever reason. You have more or a different capacity or skill set than you thought that you would be using when you took the job. Sometimes you have a bad boss. You know, the old adage that people rise to the level of their incompetence. So they get to some level, they can't do any more because no one wants them to do a better job, but you can't fire them. So now they're at that position, and now they may have been a great individual contributor, but now they're your boss and you have to listen to them. So maybe that's a good time to move. Primarily pull. So you might be faced with an exciting opportunity professionally or for your family. You might be offered better compensation, sometimes seeking an outside offer and getting I imagine it's like a flow meter in a pipe or a 4-point probe meter in an electrical circuit where you just touch your probes to the market and you just see where do I fall on this salary and benefits list. You always have to take into account your local context as well, because $100,000 in San Diego is way different from $100,000 in Mississippi. Identify signs of readiness for a new challenge. So how do you see your skills? Where do you see your skills fitting in? What do people tell you about your skills? Because sometimes we're very bad at that sort of metacognitive ability where we try to assess our own abilities. Sometimes we undervalue them. Sometimes we overvalue them. It's hard to find exactly that center of the bullseye where our skills are exactly matched to an opportunity, or where they're mismatched, but where you really strategically for your career want to try something new and build a new skill set on purpose. So you're on purpose putting yourself in the hot water. Covered all that already. Finally, I want to leave you with an idea of that's called in a book called Wild Problems by Russ Roberts, who's an American and Israeli economist, and he wrote a book of the same name, and he compares wild problems to tame problems. Tame problems are the problems that we as engineers and STEM people often encounter. They're math-like. They have an obvious right answer. If this process is going to cost this much money, but the cost of materials alone are more than what I'm going to get for that, then yeah, you don't do it. You red light that project, right? And but a wild problem is one where if you solve it with this, if you present a solution, the context will change after you've made that decision. The decision to have kids or have a life partner or take a particular job or go to grad school or do a postdoc. Those are wild problems because it is impossible to predict who you are going to be once you are in that role. And is that just to say, give up on trying to make the right decision? No. It does suggest, though, that we tend to be a little bit too risk averse, especially when it comes to changing our situations. But this is also one thing that I've been thinking about since, a lot of this decision had to do with personal finance and financial resilience and family hedging against catastrophe, is that we all have different risk tolerances. So if you are trying to invest your money and you say, all I want to do is stay on par with inflation, okay, then invest in some CDs, certificate of deposits, at a bank that gives you a 5-6% return. You might not even be at parity with inflation, but you're not going to lose your money, most likely, and you will get at least some of that. You'll hedge against some of that inflation. If you think about the next level up, you might invest in the bond market. Okay, the value of those bonds can go up and down. You'll always get a dividend. Might not be as high as it would be in a CD. Those things could change. Next level up, you invest in a bond index fund. And the bond index fund just goes up with the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones or whatever index you're tracking. And that's higher risk, higher reward. You're probably going to do better than inflation over time, at least anyone who's invested in the stock market and kept it in there for a good chunk of time and not sold during, in say April of 2020, they would be doing pretty good. Then next level up, individual stocks, venture capital or angel investment. Hey, my friend has a company. I want $10,000. Here, 50% equity for $10,000. Whatever it is, that's going to be. And is there anyone who's going to tell you what the right answer is? Yes, people will try to tell you what the right answer is, but there is no right answer. It's personal risk tolerance and whether or not you can withstand losing that money. And the same thing goes for your solution to wild problems, is that you will not be able, no one's advice is going to work for you. But my advice here, so I'll give you advice anyway, is that life is very short, and there's no time. And at the same time, it's only life. Think about what's the worst thing that could happen, what's the best thing that could happen, and to not take yourself too seriously. For the biggest thing that was holding me back from this move was UCSD is probably going to be demonstrably better than UCLA and Berkeley in the near future along many metrics. And that holding that stock in this place was really hard to give up. But is that the kind of person that I want to be? Or are all of these other considerations important enough to make me go the other way? And just as a quick plug, there's not a nice storm all the time. And we have really nice falls in Rochester as well. And at this point, I'd like to open the floor for discussion. There is pizza, and so I'll take maybe 2 questions and then we'll move out in the hallway.